The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening and welcome to Divine Truth on Revolution Radio. It's a lovely Sunday evening, and hopefully we have our guest on tonight, and my co-host Nyssa is on as well. So Nyssa, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much for coming back, Benjamin. It's going to be amazing. Thank you.
And
Thanks for having me on.
Our guest this evening is Benjamin Fulford, who's returning to the show for the third time now, I think. So good evening, Benjamin.
Good evening.
Now, there's a few topics I wanted to cover tonight because I've been reading your blog recently. And the first one I wanted to talk about is the fact that the US keeps defaulting on its loans to China. And I think they had another deadline back in May and they've got another one in September. What I really wanted to ask is why doesn't China just cut them off?
Well, you know, that's a question I actually asked a high-level Chinese secret society representative yesterday, and the answer is always the same. The United States threatens all-out thermal nuclear war if they don't get their money. And Chinese say, well, I guess it's better just to keep the can down the road and slowly sort of change things rather than give them an excuse to have a war. So it's like a hostage situation. It's a long drawn out process. But a lot of us are getting very impatient. And I suggested to the Chinese that this was a bluff and that they should call it. And then that they should not let them extend beyond December this year. What I suggested is that they offer them an alternative, which is say, look, we'll give you money in January, but it has to go through Canada. And Canada has to decide, to help restructure your government so it's run on a more sort of sane basis. Because let's face it, the United States as is now the world's largest rogue state, and people inside the U.S. establishment are sick of it, Americans are sick of it, and the whole world is sick of it. And so I think if we give them an alternative other than just complete bankruptcy and chaos, they'll take it. So that's what I've been pushing for behind the scenes.
Right, yeah. I guess it's a bit like someone running up a debt on their credit card and then having no intention of paying that debt.
Yeah, so you tell them, look, either you go, you have a choice. You can go, go to the street and become homeless, or you can go to this rehabilitation center, and there, you'll be fed and cared for. And so that's what I'm trying to convince them. I mean, look, Canada is next door to the United States. The Canadians understand how the American system works, and Canada has a much more stable, fair, successful system of government than the Americans do. So, I'm, pushing for a leveraged buyout of the bankrupt United States by the Canadians. I know it sounds crazy, but it's a very realistic possibility because the United States is bankrupt and they're mismanaged and they're not getting any better. They're not getting themselves out of the hole in any way whatsoever. So really, you need new management. And I've tried to convince the U.S. military that this is a good idea too. What I tell them is that I give the example of Scotland. Scotland was part of the United Kingdom, not because they were conquered, but because the Scottish king ruled over the whole thing. And so, in the long run, if you had a Canadian take over the United States, in the long run, Canada would be part of the United States. Hopefully, the United States of Canada, not the United States of America. But anyway, it would be good, in the long run. And I think a lot of them understand that. There's still people with, nationalistic pride and things like that who are against it. But this is the agenda that I've been pushing for behind the scenes, lobbying for, trying to convince people is the way to go. And,
Yeah, but the US probably wouldn't allow that to happen. For Canada to just step in, there'll be like almost like some kind of war between them, wouldn't there? If Canada decides to step in and take over.
Well, again, not if you have the U.S. military-industrial establishment on board, because you leave them alone. It's better to feed a dog than fight a wolf, right? But convince them that it's the political side of things that need, and because the people in the Pentagon, the agencies, they don't like, the politicians in Washington, D.C. either. And if you look at American opinion polls, support for Congress and the politicians is like less than 10%. I mean, 90% of the people are against the politicians in Washington, D.C. because they know that they are representing corrupt interests. They're not actually representing the people. They've been bribed and blackmailed and compromised, and it's a dysfunctional government. And people are aware of this. That's why you have consistent 90% opposition to the political establishment in Washington, D.C. However, the same opinion polls show very strong support for the U.S. military, at running consistently around 60-70%. So we leave the healthy institution intact, and just cut out the rotten part. And I think if we do it that way, they'll accept it. I'm hoping. I'm pushing for it anyway.
Right. What about Trump? Trump might have something to say about that.
Well, Trump clearly is had his changer. I mean, he's not really the man in control. You can tell that just, for example, by contrasting what he said when he was campaigning and what he's actually doing. For example, during the campaign, he said Bush did 9/11, and now, we listen to his 9/11 speech, and suddenly he avoids all sort of controversial topics from that. Same with the policy in the Middle East, he's saying this will attack Iran, and then suddenly he's told, no, actually, we're going to accept the deal we made with Iran because they're not actually a radical, dangerous country that the Israeli propaganda would like to have us believe. And so, in other words, I mean, the United States is run by a military junta right now, and Donald Trump is on a short leash. That's my understanding of the situation.
Right. I also wanted to ask you, in one of your blogs recently, you said that Canada was working with North Korea. Can you explain a bit more about that? So, why they're working with North Korea? What exactly are they doing with North Korea?
North Korea is a very complicated story, and it's not like what it seems to be. Now, when Kim Jong-un killed his uncle a couple years ago, I think it was, the uncle was the main conduit between China and North Korea, and he sort of ran the bureaucracy. And what happened was, and this is some sources in North Korea, was that the military and the bureaucracy had a fight. The bureaucracy lost, and Kim's uncle was killed, and the Chinese were furious. And the North Korean military, believe it or not, asked the CIA and the Americans to help them. Okay? This is something that is completely contrary to what we see. But I've been here 30 years, I have lots of sources all over the map here. And for example, when North Korea shoots off a missile, the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe knows in advance. The media campaign is prepared. It's all a fake show. So it's not like North Korea is a rogue state. North Korea is used as an excuse, a plausible reason to start a war by the Americans. So they want to, if they decide that they want to start a war to prevent bankruptcy, they're not going to say that's why they're starting a war. They're going to say, oh, we've got this rogue regime, North Korea, threatening us, and that's why we're doing it. They always have some publicly more palatable excuse for war than what's the truth. I mean, just look at what happened in World War II. I mean, the Germans told their public that Poland was attacking them. You know, come on. I mean, but you know that's not true. But if you were in Germany at the time, you wouldn't have known that.
Right, yeah, that's true. I guess is North Korea in a way China's proxy kind of thing? Is it like, you know?
North Korea is very clever. They were set up. Okay, let's give you a quick history of what happened with North Korea. Now, when Japan surrendered at the end of World War II, the huge, more than 1 million man Japanese army in China did not surrender. They said, well, we've lost the mainland, but we're going to keep fighting here in China. And they lost to the Soviet Union. And they were taken back for 10 years from concentration camps and stuff in Siberia. And then during that time, the Soviets trained and recruited, leaders who were willing to work with them. And these are the people who set up the North Korean regime. However, once they had their regime in place, it was very clever. They played off China against Russia, against the United States, and achieved a modicum of independence. The other thing you need to understand about North Korea and the secret history of the world after World War II is that the fascists who lost the war still kept a huge network. For example, they did not surrender their submarine bases. The Nazi submarine base in Sao Tome in the Atlantic and the Japanese submarine base in Guinea were kept after the war, and they funded themselves through selling opium and heroin from the Golden Triangle. And here was former Japanese military and defeated Kuomintang generals working with the CIA. And in South America, it was Nazis, again working with the CIA, selling cocaine and marijuana. And in North Korea, they set up giant amphetamines manufacturing bases. Amphetamines were invented by the Japanese military, by the way. So this whole network, and it's about, if you multiply the UN production estimates by the street price, it's something like $2 trillion a year, which is like almost 3 times the U.S. military budget. So you have this whole secret nexus linking the CIA, North Korea, this whole thing that's not part of the public worldview of how things are run, but it's very powerful. It's still there, and they're not going away. So North Korea is linked into that too. So there's a huge CIA North Korea connection going on. These are the sort of things that you learn by actually talking to the people who are involved.
And what I don't understand is, like, where does North Korea get its money from? It seems to have money for weapons and missiles and everything. And yet a lot of the documentaries you see, the people are, not particularly happy there. They don't live a very good life, as it were.
They get their money from amphetamines, and from minerals, and from overseas workers, as far as I know.
Right.
And right now, they're getting their oil from Russia, not China, is what I'm hearing. And even though China supposedly stopped importing stuff from North Korea, they're still exporting. So they're still getting, the North Koreans are still getting all their Chinese stuff, because the Chinese, it's not in their interest to have a regime collapse and chaos on their border. They'd rather keep the thing going than have, chaos and warfare. So, they'd much prefer to keep a rickety thing going along than to have an explosion and bloodshed and all that sort of stuff.
Right. So you could say.
The point.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. What you need to understand, though, about these, for example, the North Korean missile launches, you have the United States, they have their September 30th payments deadline coming up. And so they ask the North Koreans, they give them money, they ask them, pay them to send off missiles and make provocative statements, they provide them with these weapons, and then they use that as an excuse. And so the Americans were able to get a whole bunch of money out of the South Koreans and the Japanese, ostensibly in the form of having them buy the latest U.S. weaponry to protect against North Korea. But that's just arms dealers' sales talk, and they use North Korea threat. But anyway, they were able to get money from the Japanese and the Koreans to keep themselves going for a few more months. They were to use the threat of war to get the Chinese to keep things going for a few more months. But the negotiations are ongoing.
Yeah, I heard about that. Was it the Americans sold the South Koreans a new defense system based on based on the attacks that they're getting, or the supposed attacks that they're getting from North Korea.
Exactly.
So it's a good way of making money for the Americans, I guess. Isn't it?
Yeah. The other thing that's important to note is that China announced that we're going to have oil futures trading in Shanghai convertible to gold. That was a direct assault on the petrodollar. I mean, remember, the United States ran out of gold in 1972 or 1973 in the so-called Nixon shock. They took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. They effectively put it on the oil standard. And now you have, for example, Venezuela announcing they're not going to sell their oil in dollars. You have the Russians selling to the Chinese in rubles and yuan. You have the Iranians using other currencies. So the petrodollar is in great danger, and that's the main source of money, or one of the main sources, along with drugs, for the military-industrial complex, the secret part of it. So, that's another reason why they up these threats. There's a very high-stakes, high-level sort of brinkmanship going on here now, because the United States still has this incredible military machine and propaganda machine and worldwide network, but they are slowly losing their financial underpinnings, and they have to keep getting money from the Chinese to keep the show on the road.
Yeah, I heard recently there was I can't remember which politician it was. They visited Fort Knox and said, yeah, the gold's all there, it's all okay.
Steve Mnuchin, U.S. Treasury Secretary. Now, there's a few things that you have to wonder about that visit. First of all, one thing I've learned when I talk to people who actually run the planet is that a lot of them really do get involved with the occult in the sense of astronomy or astrology. Like they like to stage major world events in harmony with big celestial movements. So it's interesting that the U.S. Treasury Secretary was the first one since 1948 to visit Fort Knox, and he did it on the day of the solar eclipse on August 21st. Okay? They do these things, and it's weird, but they do it. And then he tweets that the gold is okay, but they haven't counted it since 1953, right?
Right, yeah.
So what do you mean it's okay? Well, how much gold is there, or what form is it in? Nothing like that. It's just a very vague tweet, right? Yeah. And then last week, suddenly Mnuchin has threatened to cut the Chinese off the SWIFT international payments transfer system. It all sounds like bluff and bluster, because I've been told stories over and over and over again of these giant caves filled with gold in Asia and in Korea and in the Philippines and Indonesia. But despite 10 years of searching and going to these places to look, I have yet to see any proof this gold exists. They haven't been able to produce, for example, somebody standing with a picture of holding a recent newspaper in front of a huge stash of gold. And I'm very skeptical. I think they're just saying, well, okay, how come you guys got this right to create dollars? What's it based on? And they would say, oh, well, we got all this gold in secret caves. Well, prove it. And they can't. So, I think it's based on a huge lie, and they got to keep it going to keep their whole system going. That's my understanding based on chasing this story for a long time. Right. For example, I met a gentleman who he ran a large Japanese financial institution. When he retired, he spent 20 years in the Philippines with Japanese military maps looking for Japanese World War II gold stashes, right? And in all those 20 years, I think he saw a total of like 1 ton of gold. That's a far cry from, like, some people, they talk about millions of tons. Never mind that the official total world gold stash is about 140,000 tons. I mean, I hear these ridiculous numbers, and why do they state that there's this much gold? It's because there would have to be that much gold to theoretically back all the dollars that are out there. They don't want to say these are based on vapor and psychology, because that would endanger their whole system of control.
Yeah, I heard. I think the gold bonds, like there's like 20 to 1, like against what supposed gold they have. They're like 20 times more,
Okay.
probably even more than that by now.
Well, here's a case where I've actually put out the documents on the internet. It's very well documented. We know who did it and exactly how. But during the time of the Lehman shock in 2008, okay, Alan Greenspan paid, I think, $100 million to buy rights to 700 tons of gold from an Indonesian Asian royal. This was brought up by Lord Heathcliff in the U.S. And the UK upper house. He put out all the documents, and you can see it, the speech in the internet. But so this 700 tons of gold was then a CIA forger by the name of Wilfredo Sorin used that 700 tons of gold to create 750,000 tons of gold worth of gold-backed bonds. Okay? And the Federal Reserve Board then took those gold-backed bonds, so I think that's, I'm sorry, my brain's a bit fuzzy right now, but it's something like 1,000 times more than the
yeah,
right? So so not 20 times, 1,000 times. And that was used by the Federal Reserve Board to create $23 trillion. Okay? And the Lehman crash was engineered. It was engineered, and after all the prices went crashing down, these elites, I call them the Khazarian mafia, but whatever, used this $23 trillion fraudulently created to go around and buy stocks and other assets around the world at discount prices. This is very well documented. This is proven. This is not speculation. The documents are out there. We know the names of the people involved, everything. And yet this whole charade continues.
Yeah, but these bonds are pretty much worthless now, aren't they? I mean, because they have no gold. They have no gold anyway. So
because they were able to use these bonds to use dollars, which then they use to buy real estate and fine art, and these people know that the clock is ticking. So as soon as they get this fiat money, they hurry up and they try to buy things that exist. That's why you have hyperinflation at the high end of the art market, and they're struggling to buy anything that actually exists. And as soon as they get their virtual money, they try to actually buy real companies or real estate, anything real, while their fraudulent system still continues to fool the world's people. That's why they're so scared of this gold-backed oil futures and the stuff that the Chinese are doing, because they're based on the real world. They're based on things that actually exist. And again, that's why do you think every September 30th the Americans have such a hard time? It's because the Chinese say, we want something that's real. We don't want something that's fake. And they just don't have it.
Right. The next topic I want to talk about is what's really happening in Venezuela. There's a lot of stories in the news. I think most people don't actually understand the situation in Venezuela and how it's come about. Can you sort of explain what exactly is going on in Venezuela?
All right, I'm not as well informed on Venezuela because I haven't been following it that closely. However, my understanding is that actually Venezuela is doing okay. It's not falling apart. Like, there's a huge propaganda campaign to make it look like Venezuela is falling apart. There's a huge CIA campaign to start a regime change there. But yes, Venezuela did have a drop in living standards when the price of oil went from $100 to $50. I mean, because they oil is their main thing. But the Venezuelans and the Venezuelan military support their government, and they're not starving. And more importantly, the Russians have told the Americans that they will protect Venezuela. They're not going to let them have a U.S. invasion of Venezuela, which otherwise would have happened by now. And the problem, the reason why, is because the United States gets a very large percentage of their oil imports from Venezuela, and the Venezuelans are saying, we don't want your fake dollars, we want real payment for this, and they don't have the money to pay for it. Again, it's all linked to this bankrupt U.S. regime trying to, keep people, supplying them with stuff that they can't pay for. I think that's the essence of the Venezuelan crisis. And the other thing, of course, is the Americans still have this Monroe doctrine where they want to say South America is our backyard. We want regimes in South America that obey us, and Venezuela doesn't quite fit into that. So that's why they're trying very hard for regime change, and that's why there's been this huge propaganda campaign. But everything I hear from people actually there is that it's not really that bad, and that the regime change efforts are not going very well.
Right, yeah. I mean, I guess Venezuela is another one of these countries where the Americans try to, come in and collapse the economy. And, it's the kind of thing that the Americans do sometimes if they can't take over a country, or they can't, Venezuela isn't doing what they say. They just bring people in, they start civil unrest, and they, the usual scenario.
Yeah. But the other thing that's interesting about the current regime is that a lot of the top people are ex-Marines, okay? Like, I think certainly Chief of Staff General Kelly is a Marine. I believe Mattis is. Anyway, the point is that the Marines are followers of Smedley Butler, who was, in 1933, the fascists under, I think, Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George Bush Sr., offered him the job of dictator of the United States in an attempted fascist coup. And he said no, and instead he came up with a book called War is a Racket, where he described what he did. He said, for example, the expression banana republic came from his book, as far as I remember. He said that the people at United Fruit Company decided that they wanted to sell bananas to the Americans, and they looked at the nearest place geographically where they could make or grow bananas, and then they go in there and they send the U.S. Army to invade there, and then they kick all these subsistence farmers off their land, create giant banana plantations, and then put in a puppet general as dictator. And there you have it, a banana republic. And that's the sort of thing they've been trying to do. Certainly, that's what happened in Brazil with this guy Temer. They were successful there. They got a very corrupt person, to help loot Brazil's resources to keep the regime in North America going, in the United States going. But they didn't do it in Venezuela. They were successful in Argentina too. They got an outright Nazi running that place now, as far as I'm concerned. Macri.
Right. Can you tell us what the situation is in Japan at the moment? I know we spoke about this before, about Fukushima and that type of thing. I think Nyssa actually, I talked to Nyssa earlier today, and she said she has friends in Japan, as far as she's aware.
As far as they're concerned, it's a bit of a media blackout, and either it's not as bad as we're told over here, or they're not allowed to tell people over there how bad it is. But they seem to be fine. They don't seem to be having any issues.
Look, I live 200 kilometers from Fukushima, and when it happened, of course, I was concerned. As a reporter, I try to rely on first-hand information. So I bought my own, Geiger counter, and I went around testing. I've never found anything except normal background radiation. And recently, a friend of mine was going up to Fukushima for a trip, and I gave her a Geiger counter and asked her to check around, and she didn't find anything. But what is going on, though, and there is a huge cleanup operation going on in Fukushima, but what it is a cleanup of dirty money, okay? What I've been hearing, these are very reliable reports from people actually involved, is that they're sending trucks full of Japanese yen cash money up to Fukushima, and they're pretending that the money is being spent on cleaning up radioactive waste. And what they're doing instead is they're recycling it to the politicians to keep their corrupt regime in Japan going. So, well, what they're doing is they're not cleaning up radioactivity. They're cleaning up dirty money and making it, laundering it, and then putting it through the corrupt political system here. That's what's really going on, okay? But there is no radioactivity. The radioactivity was caused by nuclear weapons placed from the seabed and a small Israeli nuclear weapon set that blew up one of the plants put in by the Israeli company Magna BSP. But that's all being washed into the ocean. Because Japan has a lot of rain and water washes radioactivity away, and so it's long gone in any real way. I mean, just take a look at downtown Hiroshima or Nagasaki at the epicenter of the atomic bomb, and you see a thriving modern city and no trace of, it's certainly not a radioactive wasteland or anything like that. Just, go to Google Earth and look at downtown Hiroshima and see what I mean. Or just look at photographs of it. So the same, Fukushima, there's no radioactivity. This is all, it's radioactive propaganda, but it's not actually radioactivity.
Right, so a lot of the stuff we're hearing in the media was pretty much sort of like fear-mongering kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a member of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, where all the actual reporters who actually live here and actually go out on their own to report, are there. And of course, they've all been going through Fukushima and stuff. And yeah, they don't report radioactivity. They only reported it along the shoreline immediately afterwards and around the vicinity of the plant, which would be consistent with the story that I've heard, which is that there was a tsunami set off by nuclear weapons planted in the seabed and a small nuclear weapon to blow up one of the power plants. And that's what the actual measurements show are consistent with. They're not consistent with a Chernobyl-style meltdown like they're trying to have us believe.
Right, okay. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is what's happening with the U.S. Navy? Because over the last few months, they seem to have a few incidents, where I think the most recent one was they collided with a tanker or something. And then it was announced that all Navy operations were put to a stop. Is there something else? Is there more to it than that? More to it than that?
Well, clearly the Americans became over reliant on electronics, and apparently the Russians and the Chinese have figured out a way to hack and disrupt these electronics. So remember they sent one of the state-of-the-art Aegis ships, the U.S. Donald Cook, to the Baltic, and a Russian plane flew over it, and then it became completely immobile. It became so that a 19th century warship could have sunk it, within a matter of minutes. So the U.S. Navy has basically been rendered fairly useless because of their excessive reliance on electronics that apparently the Chinese and the Russians know how to hack, and they're freaking out about this, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But that's what I understand.
So the Navy operations have been put to a halt until they can work out what.
Yeah, until they can figure out countermeasures.
Really. Yeah, countermeasures, right.
And then, of course, they're working on that very hard, and they're trying to stop panic by saying, "Oh, everything's okay. It was just a crew error." They don't want to say, "No, guess what? Our state-of-the-art warship got remotely hijacked by the Chinese."
I saw a video about that. I think it was that incident you're talking about, but the plane didn't fly over just once. It flew over like a dozen times over the naval ship, just to make a point, kind of thing,
Yeah.
It was almost like, you can't do anything. We'll just fly over you as many times as we want.
Mm-hmm. So they're working on it, and I'm sure that they'll come up with something at a certain point. I mean, but in the meantime, you can clearly see that they've scaled back their provocative actions big time. But at the same time, though, the Navy is doing a good job of hunting down Israeli submarines, pretending to be North Korean submarines. they've sunk, I think, at least a half a dozen Israeli submarines in recent years, and the Israelis were hoping to use them, to set off provocations and blame them on someone else, and it's not working, which is a good thing. And I think the Germans are being told to stop selling the Israelis submarines because they've been using them for nefarious purposes.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it seems the U.S. military seems to spend an inordinate amount on their budget. I think they probably spend more on their defense budget than most other countries put together. Yet they have pretty inferior technology compared to the Russians and the Chinese. You sort of wonder where all that money goes. You know.
Yeah. Well, I once met a senior U.S. military guy defense intelligence agency guy, who told me that NASA stood for not a space agency,
Yeah.
and that these so-called rovers on Mars are actually running around New Greenland and the U.S. desert somewhere, and that it's just a giant scam to siphon off huge amounts of budget money while pretending they're exploring Mars. I don't know if that's true, but that's certainly what someone told me who was in the position to know. But the same with the U.S. military. A lot of that is just spent on useless stuff. However, and here's something that uh, I don't know much about, but clearly there's a lot of stuff they're not telling us. Remember, there were reports of black triangular UFOs for like 20 years or something, and people said, "Oh, that's just nonsense. You're just a UFO maniac." And then suddenly they announced, "Oh yeah, we have these things called stealth planes, and they were black triangles." And suddenly, um, they made them public. So but I think a lot of what the U.S. military has is 20 or 30 years in advance of what they're telling us. So there's a lot of secret stuff going on that could be very advanced and game changing. They're just not letting us know. And like U.S. F-35 fighter plane, they're all calling a turkey.
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if that's not just a kind of a red herring, that they're using this so-called no good plane to make other competitors complacent while they have totally different stuff in secret. I just don't know. A lot of that stuff I'd love it if they made it public uh, and came out and told us. But right now, there's a lot of stuff that's in the black box, and I don't have special access inside that black box, but I know it's there.
Yeah, I think a lot of the money that's on the defense budget is probably spent on things like black projects,
Yeah,
which they can't talk about and it's not made public anyway.
but I'll tell you one thing though. I once interviewed a gentleman who was a top weapons developer for the Japanese military during World War II. And he told me that towards the end of World War II, he actually once rode on a Nazi flying saucer in Manchuria. This is firsthand, account. So a lot of the stuff has been kept secret, and I have seen enough credible stuff out there to make me believe they actually do have anti-gravity technology. It involves mercury and lots of electricity. That's all I know about it, but apparently they do have this. There's a lot of stuff that they've been keeping secret, which I wish they wouldn't. I wish they'd come out and just tell us all about it and make it available for like civilian use. But to do that, I think we need to have a political architecture for the planet that makes everybody feel safe and comfortable, and they don't have to be paranoid and feel they got to defend against the Chinese or the Russians or whoever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we need, I think we need to create a political environment where they feel it's safe to bring this stuff out and make it available to the general public.
Right. Yeah. This goes back to like Admiral Byrd, who went down to Antarctica and apparently was attacked with these Nazi flying saucers and had to return. But recently, there's been in the news. They found a lot of underground caverns in Antarctica. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of a lot of volcanoes have been discovered under Antarctica, and like almost like a warm climate in these underground caverns. So
Yeah. Okay.
there is a possibility that these underground bases still exist there.
Okay. Well, here's something. I actually have a source who is a relative of Admiral Byrd, who works for the CIA. I think he's a great nephew or something like that. And he was in Antarctica on November 8th, 2016, where you remember the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry was in Antarctica on the election day. Yeah. Remember that? And there are bases there. Now, I don't think there's a lot of disinformation about giant cities and pyramids and stuff like that, and frozen giants, stuff that I can't confirm. But what I can confirm through, hard-nosed, here now, reality-based Russian and other sources is that the Nazis did indeed discover some huge, warm underground caverns, under like volcanically heated rivers that created huge hollows under the ice, and that they did transfer a lot of their top scientists before the end of World War II there to keep their top secret weapons research project going after World War II, and to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Allies. And the other thing we can say for sure, just based on the official narrative, is that Antarctica is not under the control of any nation states. It's like off the grid place that a lot of corporations and other groups have used to set up research that is taboo in the official narrative. Things like genetic experiments and other things that would be prohibited for ethical reasons in the mainstream world, and that's going on for sure. So yeah, there's a lot going on in Antarctica, and there's a lot of disinformation and fantastical stuff being sent out to try to kind of cover up what's actually really happening there. And last year, I tried to get down there. I convinced the Chinese TV company to charter a plane to get me there. And suddenly, the people who were putting out these stories freaked out and said, no, don't go. So I like to actually go somewhere and see for myself. And I'm going to try again now that it's Antarctic summer is coming. I'm going to try again to actually get down there and see for myself. But clearly, it's the available historical public record makes it clear that it's the Norwegian Antarctic base in Queen Maud Land. That's the area of interest for the real bases, as opposed to these stories about aliens and buried cities and all sorts of fantastical stuff that's probably not based in reality. And that's just smoke and disinformation to cover up what's really going on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Antarctica is a very, I guess, a mysterious place because nobody can actually go there and see for themselves. So you have to rely on, sort of secondhand information and news stories and things like that. It's a, easy way to spread disinformation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people can go there, but they're out on top of the ice studying penguins and stuff. They're not in these underground warm bases, and so they put out a different story, which But it's interesting that the Australians officially announced the warm caves with temperatures of 25 degrees and evidence of life in the public narrative recently. So it shows that some kind of disclosure about what's really going on in Antarctica may be coming. I certainly hope so. The other thing I heard about these Nazi secret research projects is that after the war, a lot of them were moved to South America, inside the Andes and stuff, because it's a much more hospitable climate, even if you do have a warm underground base. So a lot of that is now in South America, not in Antarctica.
Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is the recent events in America with the hurricanes, with Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma, most recently in Florida. I read in one of your blogs about the one in Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston. May have been how do I put it, a
Geoengineered?
a weather event that was created, and also probably the one in Florida using HARP or whatever technology. Do you want to just talk about that? Why Houston, for example, was affected?
Well, I'm not. There's a lot of what we call a fog of war or the fog of disinformation around all this. So it's hard to know exactly. But what we do know, for example, is that they've also often used as a code word for geoengineered event a once in 500 years or once in 1,000 years occurrence. They used that with Hurricane Katrina, and they've used it again with Harvey and now with Irma. So that's a code word they put out. Now, the other thing is that the French magazine Charlie Hebdo, which is owned by the French branch of the Rothschild family, put out a cover cartoon showing Nazis underwater in Houston. So they're sort of saying, we hit the Nazis in Texas. I don't know, why would they put that out? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's a bizarre thing, if nothing else. But it makes it look like they said God is attacking the Nazis in Houston. Now, my sources in the U.S. military are saying that they were able to use Hurricane Harvey and the flooding as a cover to get large U.S. military soldiers and equipment on land. And according to them, it's to prepare to fight against any attempt by California to succeed from the United States. I mean, that's what the sources are telling me. It's hard to say. Now, as far as Irma is concerned, again, it's interesting that these hurricanes hit bush power bases in Florida and Texas, but it hit on, September 11th, the anniversary of the World Trade Tower, engineered event, right? Now, the other thing is the U.S. Navy put out charts showing some kind of electronic pulse coming from Antarctica and heading straight towards Hurricane Irma. Now, I don't know. I mean, the problem is a lot of this stuff is if it's on the internet, the stuff I told you about the Nazis being flooded, that's confirmable. And my direct source is telling me about the U.S. using that flooding as a cover to get lots of troops on board. That's for sure. But the charts of showing electronic pulses coming from Antarctica heading towards these hurricanes is something I saw on the internet. And there's, the computer graphics and all sorts of other stuff can make the internet a huge wonderland of fake information. So I'm not sure about that one. However, now I've been told by a senior Chinese source that China was hit repeatedly with weather weapons, and it was them who were retaliating by hitting the U.S. back. Again, this is what a direct source told me.
Right.
But clearly, it's just there were no hurricanes hitting the U.S. for 12 years before Irma and Harvey. And 12 years was totally unprecedented in the entire history of hurricanes since they started measurements. So clearly, something has changed in terms of weather warfare and who controls it. But, again, there's so much fog, it's hard to know for sure. But let's see if Hurricane Jose hits New York during the General Assembly meeting of the UN. That would be an interesting one if that happens. Because New York is definitely not hurricane territory. And if that happens, then we know for sure this is somebody sending a message.
Benjamin, just speaking about messages, I was just wondering if you had any inside intel on the reason why they've actually stopped the Big Ben clock in London on the day of the eclipse for the next 4 years. If there's any kind of significance to that at all.
I wish I had inside information on that, but I'd have to look at what sort of solar events or astronomical events are due over the next 4 years to get a better picture of that. But yeah, I doubt that's a coincidence. Unfortunately, I don't have the enough information to give a meaningful comment there. I'm sorry, but I doubt it's a coincidence. They did it on the day of the eclipse, and there's something going on, but I don't know exactly what it is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it just seems very bizarre as well, because the Prime Minister Theresa May over here, she actually didn't want it stopped, and the experts were saying there's no reason for it to be stopped because the excuse is it's for repairs, and the actual type of. Sorry, go on, Ben.
No, they also didn't they have like a big fire sacrifice in London on the Grenfell Towers? I mean, that was clearly some kind of esoterically engineered event. That was not a natural or a normal fire.
Yeah, Grenfell Tower. Grenfell Tower. The police were actually reported to be stopping people from actually running in and saving people from the tower, and the comms, like the key lock to get people out had actually melted, and it was absolutely horrendous. So you're right there as well. If you got any opinions on Brexit at all, has that been engineered so that we have a financial collapse at the same sort of time as North America, so that we can kind of be melded together as Britain and North America as like one kind of new financial, maybe digital financial system in the future?
No, I think this was a result of. First of all, the British establishment was very, very upset when they found out that the whole reason why Britain ceded its sovereignty to the UN in the first place, or to the EU in the first place, was because Prime Minister Heath had been filmed having sex with a young boy by the Russians, and he was blackmailed into signing off US or UK independence. That's not a good reason to give up your national sovereignty, right? So that was the big one. And the other thing is that there's a realization in the British establishment that the EU is not, first of all, it's not democratic. It's structured like the old Soviet Union. Second of all, it's not even meritocratic. It's run by these sort of cabal families, the European ones, the Italian and the French and stuff. And so they say, hey, this is the EU. The EU is not democratic. It's not meritocratic, and it's not good for Britain. And the other thing that the British financial community made this.
Ben, we're just gonna stop for a break now. Okay, we're just gonna go to a commercial break.
Okay.
And welcome back to the Divine Truth on Revolution Radio. Before we continue with the show, I just need to remind you that Revolution Radio is a listener-supported station. We do rely on your donations to keep us on air. So please do go to freedomslips.com and go to the support us section where you can make a one-off donation. You can also join our monthly support club and make a monthly donation starting at only $10. Or you can go and buy one of our seed packs, which start at only $60. All of our seed packs contain non-GMO, non-hybrid heirloom seeds. You can also access the Revolution Radio archive, which is only $5 a month, and you can listen to not just to my show but all of the host show on Revolution Radio. So please do go to freedomslips.com and make a donation if you can. Now we'll return to the show with Benjamin Fulford. Hopefully he's still there. Benjamin, you were explaining about Brexit just before the break. Do you want to carry on what you were saying?
Now, the British financial community, and this includes the British branch of the Rothschild family, Lord Jacob Rothschild, I think Evelyn Rothschild, and Nathaniel Rothschild, as well as the Queen and other people, realized, for one thing, they were wise enough not to give up the pound and take on the euro, because that would have been a real loss of sovereignty. And the other thing they did is that they were the first to realize that teaming up with China was a wiser course than sticking with the old U.S. Federal Reserve Board-based dollar establishment. That's why they set up yuan trading in London City. That's why they helped the Chinese integrate the Singapore, Hong Kong financial markets with Chinese financial markets. And that's why they moved a lot of the gold trading to China. And it was the British who led the big European exodus towards the Asia AIIB and outside of the Washington-based structure that of the World Bank and the IMF and all that stuff that's been going on since World War II. So the Brexit was a conscious move by the British establishment to follow the real money and the real financial flows that are based on actual movement of trade and goods and not virtual money created by computer algorithms on a stock exchange. There's no relationship to reality. And there's a big campaign against the Brexit now by the old establishment, but I think it was a wise decision and it'll be good for Britain. But the other thing, of course, is that there is a different dimension. If you look at the military dimension, then the British realize the Anglo-Saxons need to stick together. That means the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Canadians, the Americans, and the British need to keep our military alliances strong and stable. The other thing, of course, is Britain is also the Commonwealth is still a major player in the world, even if it's not a British Empire in the old sense of the word. It's certainly a network of English-speaking people who share a lot of values, and they're going back to that and away from this Roman Empire type structure that the EU was becoming. I think it's a healthy trend overall.
What is your opinion of the Queen? I've heard stories that the Queen is actually dead, and that the woman who is supposedly the Queen at the moment is a double. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
I hear a lot of stories about clones and people being replaced and stuff, but as far as I can tell, it's still the same old Queen. There was a bit of a fuss when she didn't appear in public for a while, but I think she's there for people to see and touch, and I'd like to believe that she's still around. But the important thing to remember is that the Queen is really a symbol. It's a symbol of unity. It's a symbol of stability, and although I'm totally against absolute monarchies and stuff. I think symbolic monarchy has a long-time stabilizing effect. It's something that's been around for 1,000 years. It's survived the ups and downs of revolutions and other things. It provides stability and continuity, and it's like an emergency backup system for when the day-to-day management of government becomes dysfunctional. So overall, I support it. But only as a sort of cultural construct of unity and stability. Not definitely, I'm opposed to absolute monarchy like you have in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm. Recently in the UK, we had the 20th anniversary of the death of Princess Diana. I don't know if you know anything about what really happened.
I do.
With Princess Diana, if you want to comment on that.
Yes, it was an honor killing. Let's make no bones about it. She was pregnant with a Muslim man's child and was going to convert to Islam, and this would have been two major losses faced to the British monarchy as symbolic head of the Church of England. So yeah, it was an honor killing, but she was pregnant and she was killed. I mean, that's my understanding from direct sources who know about this sort of stuff.
Right. So who sort of instigated it? Is it MI5, or I've heard stories about Mossad doing it, or MI5, or different
It
agencies.
would have been MI5 or MI6 in concert with their French counterparts. And again, it was to protect the monarchy. That's what they did. I don't know if the Queen herself was involved. I doubt it. I think they'd rather not have her dirty her hands with such things directly. But somebody decided that this is in the interests of the British monarchy and it was done.
Yeah. There were a lot of stories at the time when it happened. I remember when it happened, and the people sort of went against the Queen because she didn't make any public announcement or any public appearance about Diana when she died, and I think finally she did go out and make a public announcement about it, and it was pretty much her funeral was treated as a funeral of a royal, even though she had already divorced Charles at that point and she wasn't a member of the royal family anymore. I think some people think there was a bit of animosity there from the Queen, that she had to treat Diana as a royal, when she wasn't.
Yeah, well, she was. I mean, she was with the old the royal family, and they forced Charles to marry her to get an original British Isles bloodline, and not just the German Saxe-Gotha bloodline that the Queen's family also, has a lot of. So this was definitely meant to keep, I think it was blood from the Isles in the royal family, and it was imposed into the royal family. Charles was forced to marry her for that reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories at the moment about the Queen abdicating in the next few years, so that Charles can step in as as king, as it were, and Camilla as queen. But there's a lot of people thinking that Prince William may well become king, but who knows what will happen there, really.
I gotta tell you something. My name is Fulford, and people don't realize that, but the Battle of Fulford took place in 1066. And that's the one that King Harold won before he lost the Battle of Hastings, okay? So, I personally, this is just in my own personal emotional thing, but I'd rather see a King Harold again, so I'd like to see Harry in there, but that's just, that's just my own thing. That's not I don't decide British royal policy, but that's just my own view on it.
Yeah, I think most British people would like to see either, William or Harry to become king. They don't. I think after the whole Diana thing, people don't particularly want Charles and Camilla to become king and queen of England.
My mother once had lunch with Charles at my grandfather's house in Canada, and her impression was he was a rather snobby man. They supplied champagne. He said, "Oh, filthy bubbly," and this is a personal story, but they weren't very impressed when they actually met him. That's all I can say. I've never met him myself.
Yeah. The next subject I want to talk about is an event that's supposedly going to happen on September 23rd, and I've heard all kinds of different stories about this date that's been going around for months. Some people are, quoting the Bible and saying it's going to be some kind of, apocalyptic event, or some kind of, I don't know what's going to happen on September 23rd. But I don't know if you've heard any rumors or stories about that particular date.
No, I've heard so many things about particular dates. I never go by them. For example, the big one was, of course, December 21st, 2012, and that came and went, and nothing happened, you know what I mean? And so things happen, but I'm very wary about pinning them on specific dates. I mean, I like to joke that the world did go through an ascension on December 12th. It was December 21st, 2012, because after that, gravity increased and things started getting smaller, especially clothing. That's just me making an excuse for becoming fat since then, But you can make all these stories. But no, I don't. The more important date is September 30th.
Yeah.
Because that's the payments deadline for the U.S. government, and if they miss the payment, then they're given 17 days afterwards to come up with money, and then they were officially closed down. Now, they have been given a 3-month extension, but there's going to be all sorts of threats of war and bluffing and table thumping and propaganda about events happening as these negotiations continue. Is there some major astronomical event due on September 23rd?
I'm not sure really. Do you know, Nyssa?
Yeah.
Is there an event, some kind of alignment or something?
There's the major one with the Virgo with Regulus, the fixed star Regulus moves from Leo into Virgo. I'm not sure if that's September 23rd, but that's supposed to be happening soon. That's supposed to be a major event.
Well, then they would be trying to engineer something, and it's our job to try to figure out what it is, and if it's nasty, prevent it. And the best way to prevent it is by making it public in advance and pointing the finger as to who's exactly doing it. And what's good is the veil behind these people is being lifted. I mean, we have these Italian esoteric families, the P2 Freemason Lodge, who admit that they've been doing engineering these events, and once they're identified, that really weakens them, because they're still mortals who can be targeted, even if they have some sort of esoteric knowledge and power. And that's something that's never happened before. They've never been this exposed. For example, now we have people coming out, many people coming out and admitting that they were actually sacrificing children and stuff in these weird ceremonies. Before that was stuff of Hollywood. Finding out that Dutch banker, I think Bernard, he came out and said, yeah, they were sacrificing children. I've heard the same. And when people find out about that, of course, they want to string them up from a lamppost, which is probably what we should be doing for a lot of these people. Remember that famous George Bush Sr. quote? It was during the Iran-Contra scandal, and he said to this lady journalist, if the American people find out what we did to them, they would string us up from the nearest lamppost.
Yeah.
And it's true. And the thing is, we are finding out, and a lot of them have been strung up or killed already. There's a lot of people in the U.S. Special Forces and other places that are actually actively hunting these people down. And a lot of them have disappeared. And what they cover it up. The problem now is that computer graphics have reached the point where they can, for example, produce a very plausible Hillary Clinton television interview, make it look like she's still alive when she's not. They have that technology, and they're trying to cover up the deaths of a lot of very senior people. But we know officially that David Rockefeller's dead and Zbigniew Brzezinski is dead, but I've been told repeatedly that George Soros is dead, and I've been told that Bill Gates is gone. The Clintons are gone. By the way, I've found out...
Bill Gates is gone. When did that happen?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've been told this, and when I hear this stuff, I try to see if there's any public event where lots of people can independently verify that he's still there, showing up or not. I'm still monitoring that one, trying to find out. But in the case of George Soros, his family announced that the foundation was being divided among his children, and he hasn't appeared in public for a very long time. That's more plausible. I'm still, gathering evidence on Bill Gates. But the other thing is, so now they put out videos of Hillary Clinton, who's apparently, my sources are telling me that she's David Rockefeller's daughter. And by the way, Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook is David Rockefeller's grandson. And that whole clan has lost a lot of power. I don't, I've been told she was killed, but I'm not sure. A lot of the stuff, there's so much fog of disinformation that, I guess, have you guys heard of the Mandela effect?
Yeah.
So Nelson Mandela died in prison. And then they put out this other guy who pretended to be Nelson Mandela, and it was so successful that they've been doing it ever since. There's a lot of fake leaders out there who exist only as look-alike actors and computer graphics, and then the people behind the curtain are never seen. Like, more and more of that's going on. And we've got to be very careful and discerning to try to figure out when these things are going on. And that's why I always try to get somebody I actually personally know. For example, I have a friend in Arizona. I'm trying to get him to go see if he can actually physically see the real John McCain, or if he only exists now as fiction on the internet. Things like that. I try to check myself. And so far I can't confirm, for example, that John McCain is still real or not.
Right. So, yeah, I did want to ask you about the Mandela effect. I thought it was, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but is it some kind of psyop or?
They use actors and computer graphics to create opinion makers. I mean, didn't like Stephen Hawking? Have you seen him? I heard he died 15 years ago, but every once in a while they trot out a picture of him and some statements allegedly made by him attempting to influence public opinion according to a certain agenda, you know. But, I mean, I remember in the 1990s he had some disease that was only supposed to let him live for a few years, and yet, you know, here he is supposedly still around. I don't know.
Yeah, I heard a story a while ago about one of the people who looked after him, worked for him, that what they do is they just drug him up. And I think one day, I don't know, they gave him the wrong dose or something. He actually got up out of his chair and tried to make a run for it. And so he doesn't actually have, you know, the disease that they're saying. He's actually, you know, they deliberately drug him. And the computer, they just type whatever they want, you know, to make him say whatever they want him to say.
Okay, so they've got a look-alike, and I've heard that for example, the teeth are different, the face is different. So they have a look-alike play the role. So maybe they got some guy who's not a cripple, who they put every once in a while they put out in a wheelchair and put in front of an audience, and then they type in their stuff on the computer when they want to influence opinion using this character, you know. A lot of that's going on, and it's not a healthy trend in the long term. It's sort of like what's happening with these secret controllers is that they've forgotten the story about the boy who cried wolf, and they can use these lies and deceptions and stuff, and they'll work to a certain point. But I think it's starting to wear off. They're starting to wake up. They're not being fooled anymore, and for example, they do this North Korean missile thing so many times at a certain point, oh yeah, or they stage another, you know, so supposed mass killing at a concert, or maybe they really do kill people at a concert, but they just can't, the effect isn't working, they're not generating as much fear or psychological sort of effect as they were in the past. I mean, they had that big French killing at the concert, and that had a huge effect on global psychology, but then they've done it at other concerts, and no, just a little blip on the graph, you know. So their tools aren't working. They're losing their control grid, which is a good thing. I mean, I think that saying from the Bible, "The truth shall set you free," is coming true.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I think there was a recent attack right here in London where an improvised explosive device blew up on a tube train. I don't think anybody actually died, but, you know, again, in a few days it'll be forgotten about. And it's the same with all of these, you know, events. You know, they're in the news for a few days and then people forget about it.
Yeah, and then we're getting immune to it. It's sort of like, oh yeah, I see again. Okay, right. So their tools aren't working the way they used to. Which is a good thing. I mean, originally we were supposed to have informed public debate and make decisions that way democratically, you know, and not through computer graphics and lies and staged events involving killing people and scaring people, you know, which is what they're trying to do now.
Yeah, I think with the problem these days with CGI and computer graphics, like you say, you know, they can kill someone, and unless you see that person face to face yourself, you know, it's a bit like, you know, like Julian Assange. I don't know when was the last time anybody saw him in public. Obviously, he's locked up in, you know, the Ecuadorian embassy still. So, you know.
Well, my sources tell me he was a Mossad agent who was killed and replaced by a CIA lookalike. Okay, that's my own direct sources. not stuff from the internet. And that's why his story changed after someone brought him some food or something, and then anyway, there was a switchover made, and you can see that what Assange was saying before and after that has changed. So the Assange media presence has fallen under control of a new group with a different agenda from the previous Assange group. But I was never a fan of Julian Assange because he wasn't telling us anything we didn't already know, and he was actively participating in the cover-up of what happened on 9/11. So he was never the real deal in my book.
Right. I wanted to ask you also about John McCain. Is he also another person who's died and been replaced? Because he did have cancer, didn't he? And then all of a sudden he went into remission.
Well, they announced he had a nasty brain cancer, right? And then suddenly, a week later, he bounces back and defeats Trump in the Congress, you know. And clearly there's some sort of battle going on over the John McCain persona. But, you know, there are pictures of John McCain with the heads of ISIS, who are all Mossad agents, right? And McCain was seen as like a top Mossad man in the United States, and a lot of the people in the military establishment really hated him. I think so. Either McCain is dead, or he's fled to Italy, but they're still using his persona and pretending that he's still there and everything's fine and dandy. I just don't know. Like I say, I've got somebody on the ground who's trying to confirm that there's an actual John McCain person, and so far they haven't been able to. But, you know, there's just so much of this stuff going on now. That's why it's really important to have actual reporters with feet on the ground going to the actual location and seeing for themselves, you know? Because the internet has become the greatest tool of misinformation in history, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is in one of your blogs, you stated that Benjamin Netanyahu paid an unannounced visit to Russia. Do you know what that was about?
Yeah, I mean, what's happened is that the American military and the Russians agree that the whole Saudi-Israeli nexus in the Middle East has to be neutralized. And you actually have, you have official reports in Israeli newspapers that IS fighters are being treated in Israeli hospitals, like Haaretz, okay? And you have a picture of John McCain with Shimon Elliott, the Mossad agent, who is later appears as el-Baghdadi, okay? So you have both the Russian, the Iranian, and the U.S. military fighting against Israeli proxies in the Middle East, okay? That is causing the Israelis to freak out big time, because now they have a giant Russian, Hezbollah, Iranian army right on their border. And the American military is sick and tired of Israel and what they've been doing ever since they tried to sink the USS Liberty in 1967. And they're trying to force the Israelis to, you know, follow world opinion and come up with a deal with the Palestinians based something around the 1967 agreements, you know, like, and there's still fanatical people in Israel who think they're going to create a greater Israel and rule the world from Jerusalem, and they don't want to give up this mad dream. And Netanyahu went to Russia because he freaked out when he saw these Iranian troops from the Israeli border. And he was told that, look, you guys, you're supposed to hand the Golan Heights back to Syria. You're not going to keep them forever. And that was just, they thought, oh no, we're going to build greater Israel. Nothing's going to stop us. They're fanatics. They're not, they don't think like normal people. They think they have some sort of biblical God-given right. The other thing you got to remember, I mean, Israel as a whole, it's a country filled with Europeans who've been brainwashed into thinking they came from a country called Judea that existed 3,500 years ago, when in fact they are mostly descendants of, Ukrainian Khazars, and not, and the original Judeans are now converted to Islam in the 7th century, and then now they're called Palestinians. And there's so many lies about that whole country. I mean, once the Israeli people realize how much they've been brainwashed, a lot of them, I think, are going to just say, I'm out of here, and the ones who want to stay, they're going to be left in peace and allowed to continue their lives, in any trouble. They just have to stop, get rid of these fake non-Jewish leaders who actually worship Satan and pretend only to be Jews, and have genuine Jewish leadership and make peace with their neighbors. They got no other choice. But nobody, this is the important thing, nobody is going to get them, nobody's going to kill them, there's going to be no Holocaust, there's nothing to worry about. But they've been made so paranoid through so much propaganda that, they're going to need a lot of remedial education on their true history. Otherwise, that country's going to keep making problems for the rest of the world for a very long time. They need to be taught the true history based on, the actual, for example, cuneiform documents found and the actual history, and not the fake history. This is very important because if they really want to follow the Creator, then they have to study the creation, the actual real world, not lies.
Right, I agree. What do you think, in your opinion, what's like the biggest threat in the world right now? What do you personally worry about the most?
Well, I worry that the controllers of the current financial system will try to take the planet down with them rather than surrender peacefully and go quietly into the night. It's very important to, and I think and I know for a fact that the militaries of China, Russia, and the U.S. understand and have agreed they're not going to be fooled into starting World War III and creating an Armageddon because these people want us to, but their attempts to start World War III are the biggest problem the world faces in terms of geopolitics. The other thing that I worry about is the destruction of nature. And that's nothing to do with so-called global warming. It's everything to do with deforestation and destruction of natural ecosystems because of our current economic system that places no inherent value in nature. So we need to change that. So my biggest worry, yes, the destruction of the environment and attempts by these religious fanatics to start Armageddon.
Right. Okay. The next topic I want to talk about is you mentioned in one of your blogs that the protests that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, with I think it was it the white supremacists instigating riots. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have a friend who works for David Duke, who is supposedly the head of the Ku Klux Klan and the supreme white supremacist hate group boss. Okay, now, so he was actually there in Charlottesville. I met him in Canada and talked about it face to face. Now, first of all, I'm not saying I agree with these people, all right? But what they're thinking is these so-called white supremacists saying, look, we're going to become a minority in our own country. Who decided that the United States would let in all these people from Guatemala and Africa and other places, and they're having huge amounts of kids, and white people are going to be a minority in their own country, and also we're being actively discriminated against in academia and other places, and it's just not fair. Okay, that's what they think. I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm just saying that's their worldview. And when they announced they're going to take down the statue of General Robert E. Lee, they applied for a permit to peacefully protest, and they were supposed to protest from noon to 5 p.m., have a bunch of speeches, and then disperse. What happened was that when they arrived, they were all told enter the protest area through a particular route. And as they went there, they were met by a gauntlet of people, the Antifa people, who were throwing bags of urine at them, used menstrual pads, used condoms, and worse, acid and fire. Apparently one of the scheduled speakers was actually permanently blinded by an acid attack by these people. And this was not reported. It was like, and then the murder of a woman was either staged or whatever. But again, people who were actually there say it wasn't some right-wing radical running, ramming a car into a peaceful leftist protester. This was staged too, and it was accompanied by a huge media campaign in all the papers and TV about right-wing hate groups and white supremacists. But the actual reality on the ground was that once the violence started, all the right-wing protesters were dispersed and left town, and that the rest of the day the whole thing was just paid activists staging events, and that there were actually multiple witness reports that the Black Lives Matters protesters and the Ku Klux Klan protesters were arriving in the same buses. Okay? And that the Black Lives Matters protesters were all white, and that the local African Americans were shouting insults at them. This is from a friend who was actually there, who took videos and photographs to back up what he was saying. He keeps his name private because he's worried about for his life, because he understands that if he offends what he calls the Jewish control grid of the United States, his life's gonna be in danger. That's his worldview. I'm not saying I agree with it, but what I do know from the account of someone who's there is that it's definitely not as it was reported. And the U.S. military is also on the case, and they're actively preventing further attempts to use professionally paid agitators to start riots in different parts of the United States. They're being arrested and being put in jail where they belong. I don't agree with these people's worldview, but they certainly have the right to peacefully express it. And and if they want to have their own little communities of just white people breeding white people, fine. That's not a problem, as long as they're not attacking other people. And as far as I'm concerned, and here they're not. They're not being violent in any way, form, or whatsoever. They just think that they need to preserve their European ancestry and genetic heritage. And, that's their freedom to choose, as long as they're not attacking other people. Nobody's forcing them to marry Chinese or whatever. But yeah, like I say, it's not as it was reported.
Yeah, I agree. It's just another way of them instigating this type of race wars, I guess. It's just another way of.
And the thing is, the Americans have gone way beyond this race stuff as a general rule. It is true, though. I mean, if you're born as an African American, you are definitely discriminated against. You have trouble getting housing. I remember being in New York, and this African American gentleman, dressed in a nice pinstripe suit, said, "Could you hail a taxi for me?" And I said, "Why?" I said, "Well, they don't stop for us, So there is still discrimination going on, and there's still work to be done, but it's not like it was where we had race riots and stuff. The Americans are way beyond that now,
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when we had the London riots. A black kid was shot by the police, and then we had the massive London riots, and they burnt down a lot of buildings, and for several days, there were riots on the streets of London, and people, couldn't go outside, and it was all over just one incident where the police shot, a guy who they thought had a gun, but he didn't.
Well, I'm more sympathetic, I think, to African Americans than the average person of European ancestry, because I've been living in Japan for a long time, and because of my race, I've been denied credit cards, I've been unable to rent apartments, I've been unable to get bank loans, My daughter, whose mother is Japanese, his father is European ancestry, was isolated and humiliated at school because of this. So I'm personally very, very deeply against racial prejudice and racism and all that kind of stuff. But I also believe in freedom of expression, a non-violent expression of opinion. And I think these so-called white supremacists, if they're being peaceful and they want to express their views, they should be allowed to do so.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with you. It's sort of like it's been going on for a long time, though, hasn't it? Like different races and different religions fighting against each other. I don't see any change there, really, to be honest. But
there are people who are trying to, cause these fights to provoke them to create incidences. They've been doing that for a long time. Like this, it was well documented in the Ukraine in the Maidan protesters. We had the police and we had the protesters. I had a Russian journalist friend who was there. She infiltrated the protests, and she said, "I want to participate in the protests." I told her to go to a tent where she was paying 50 euros a day and told she could have as many drugs as she wanted. The only condition was that she had to go and participate in these protests, and she did. And then there was a third party, snipers, shooting both the police and the protesters to try to get them to actually start killing each other. And the same in the United States. You have these paid agitators trying to get different groups to fight each other, provoking it, trying to do it. And it's the paymasters for these provocateurs who need to be rounded up and put in jail. And that's happening, as far as I know. That's why the attempts to start race riots in the United States are getting nowhere.
Right. Another thing, I posted a show on Facebook and somebody wanted to ask you a question about, I don't know if you know about when the hurricane hit Houston. Recently they've sent out what are called FEMA barges for people who have been evacuated out of Houston. They're putting them on these what look like prison barges pretty much, and obviously the people who've been evacuated out of Houston are not particularly happy about being put onto these FEMA barges. Is this like an attempt to get people used to using these these FEMA sort of camps and barges?
I haven't heard about those barges, but it was well documented that Hurricane Katrina was used as an experiment to see if they could use a natural disaster as a pretext to get Americans into concentration camps. And they did take a whole bunch of armed men, took a bunch of African Americans and confined them to arenas and other areas. It was an exercise. So the same sort of fascist types who are very strong in that area may well have been trying that again. But I don't think they're succeeding. I don't think the Americans are they've been complacent, but now they're quite angry and they're very well armed, and I don't think any attempt to round them up and put them in camp is ever going to work.
Do you have
the U.S. military will prevent it.
Do you have any new information about the FEMA camps? And I mean, how many? Do you have any idea how many FEMA camps there are in the U.S.?
I don't know, but what I have heard is that if anybody's going to be put into FEMA camps, it's going to be the old controlling group. I've heard there's about 1 million people who have been involved in the secret control attempt to enslave the American people, and if anybody goes, it'll be those 1 million people. A lot of them, they're not Jewish. Some of them pretend to be Christian, some of them pretend to be whatever, but these are the people who go. If anybody goes to the FEMA camps, it'll be those people, not the average American.
Right, okay. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is, what do you know any current news on the Federal Reserve Bank? Are they still pretty much just printing money like there's no tomorrow, or have they slowed that down or increased it?
what they've been doing is that they've been funneling money into the stock and bond markets to keep the entire financial system from collapsing. And it's sort of like injecting morphine into a person who's dying of cancer to try to, cover up the symptoms without dealing with the underlying cause. So you have now, was it $7.4 trillion worth of bonds that are trading at negative interest rates, and you have stock market valuations that are totally out of touch with historical common sense measurements of what the appropriate stock price should be. So they're using this vapor money and they're putting it into the economy via the stock and bond markets, and they're buying time, but they're essentially it's like using one credit card to pay off another credit card to pay off another. They're buying time, but it's not mathematically sustainable. But yes, they're still printing money and putting it into markets, and the real market participants are getting out. People like Warren Buffett and Jacob Rothschild have said, we're out of the stock market. This is not based in reality anymore. So they are in control for now, but I don't know how much longer that's going to last.
Yeah, I heard that Lord Rothschild started selling assets pretty fast. I think in the last 6 months he sold quite a lot, and
I think he reduced his U.S. exposure by 61% in the first 6 months of this year, and probably more since then. And this is the sort of person who probably knows what's going on, behind the scenes. The same with Warren Buffett. He's got $100 billion cash now. He's never had that much. He just says there's no good investments out there right now. Again, these are people who follow the traditional rules, So the financial system is becoming increasingly detached from reality. And the other thing that's happening is that almost all the profits are being made by computer algorithms. And the result is that humans are being driven out of the markets, and they're creating these incredible theoretical sums of money that have no counterpart in the real world economy. For example, the last time I looked into this, which is quite a while ago, the amount of foreign exchange trading taking place every day is worth more than 1,000 times the actual value of foreign exchange. Like when people, for example, buy French francs to go to France. I'm sorry, they buy euros to go to Europe, or they pay for a ship full of Chinese toys. So it's 1,000 times more than the real world. That's unsustainable.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it's sort of like it's been going on for a number of years, isn't it? I mean, the collapse has got to happen sooner or later. They can't just keep printing money forever.
Yeah, I was very closely in touch with the financial markets as a financial reporter during the Japanese bubble, and I was saying it was a bubble, and it was right. But and the real estate prices are now 1/20th of what they were. Commercial real estate prices are about 1/20th of what they were at the peak of the bubble. The problem with a bubble, though, is that you can say it's a bubble, but it's hard to predict when it's going to burst. It could double in size before it bursts, but it will burst. And the same is true of the stock markets right now.
Right, I agree. I saw an article recently, I don't know if you know anything about this, but a lot of prominent people have been photographed with black eyes. People like the Pope and a few others, and I've heard stories about why they've had black eyes, but I don't know if you know anything about that or want to comment on that.
There's one case I do know about, which was that the CIA caught German Chancellor Angela Merkel when she was on a ski holiday in Switzerland, and they beat her up to intimidate her into following some kind of agenda. I forget what it was. And I heard this from the people who actually beat her up. And then it was officially in the news that she had a ski accident a couple of days later. She showed up all bruised. So it's a good guess that somebody is beating these people up and telling them to get into line. So that might have been the case with the Pope. I just don't know for sure. But the problem with the Pope is that he's still pushing this carbon-based global warming agenda, and it's just not factual. I agree that we should have a huge campaign to save the environment, but it should be based on the real environmental problem, which is, primeval forests being burned down and turned into yam plantations. It's not some sort of carbon thing. So maybe somebody got to him. I just don't know. But I did confirm that case with Angela Merkel a few years ago. So it's a good bet that, yes, somebody's beating him up and trying to get him into line.
Yeah, I agree with that. I saw a few other photos. I think John Kerry was another one, and I think they even showed
I recall John Kerry is dead. I haven't seen him in public all the time. But,
right. Okay.
There's a lot of them who are being killed, is what I heard, and some of it's been announced, some of it's not. But they're scared, and there's a good reason for it. There's a lot of people in the agencies and the special forces who are sick and tired of these gangsters who've been mismanaging our planet, and they're hunting them down. That's a fact.
Okay. We're going to finish the show in about 5 minutes. Is there anything that you want to say, like in the last 5 minutes, that
yes,
you want our listeners to know about?
Okay, here's the thing: is when if you give somebody no choice, you put them into a corner, they're gonna, have to fight. And now that we have the old regime in the United States bankrupt, and if we don't give them an alternative that's better than all-out thermonuclear war, we're gonna have all-out thermonuclear war. And what I've been proposing to the Chinese is that we set up a new agency based on best practices of the best-run countries in the world, like the Northern Europe, Canada, Japan, and Singapore, to set up a new, for example, future planning agency and other agencies to replace the dysfunctional IMF and, revamp the international architecture that was built after World War II in such a way is that the Westerners don't lose face, and that we all come together to share this planet together in a open, democratic, meritocratic way. But we need to offer a better alternative to these people who are losing power than total destruction. That's why I've been pushing very hard for takeover of the United States government by the Canadians as a good way of starting this process, and then the creation of new agencies to better manage our planet according to the best practices we have right now and the most successful places on Earth. We really do, we're mismanaging this planet. It's nothing to do with global warming, but we are destroying the natural environment. Tuna stocks are at less than 3% of their historical levels. Rainforests are being destroyed. Extinction is happening at the greatest level since the dinosaurs were wiped out 65 million years ago. We really do need to set up a much more competent and benevolent system for running the planet than the system we have now, which is basically inbred groups of gangsters who were following an apocalyptic agenda involved killing 90% of the world's population and then having this feudal regime run by a few inbred families replacing it. We don't want that, but we do have to do something about how we're running this planet. And, the Asians are very friendly, and they want to make love, not war, and they're out to dominate. And I think that we have an opportunity in the next 3 months to bankrupt the warmongering regime in the United States and replace it with something much more amenable to the planet. Remember, the United States has been at war for more than 220 years, and it's 240 years of independence, and that has to change. And we need to come up with something. I think, you know, we're offering solutions, we're offering plans. We need to come up with something better, and I encourage us all to take this opportunity over the next 3 months to not kick the can down the road, but to actually set up these new, healthier, more benevolent institutions without having to resort to World War III. And that's what I'm pushing for, and that's what I'm lobbying for. And it's going to be democratic, meritocratic, transparent, and controlled by the people, not controlled in secret by inbred gangster families like we have now. That's what we're pushing for.
Okay, and for our listeners, if they want to get more information on your blog, they can go to benjaminfulford.net. I know you've recently revamped your blog.
Yeah, they cut off all my money, and now we're trying to get subscribers again. We have a new system outside of the control of PayPal, and hopefully I can get my income back to the level where I can make a living again. So any support on that level, any subscriptions to my blog, it's free for now, but we're going to make it subscription-based again, starting in October. And what we'll do is we'll have a system where paid subscribers get the news first, and then everybody else gets it a week later. It's the same business model that's used by AP or Reuters. But you know, your support is most appreciated.
Okay, well, we'll wrap the show up now. Thanks for coming on, Benjamin.
Mm-hmm.
And
thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
and you know, England is a you know, there'll always be in England, and England shall be free. You know, and your country is a beacon of hope for the world. And I'm a great fan of the British.
Okay.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone, and good night.